Forward and into the center, that would be great as well. We've got sort of an intimate moment here to be with Reverend Janna. And So our last presenter for the day is Reverend Janna Louie, and she works with the Baptist Joint Committee. And if you know the history of Roger Williams that we heard about this morning, it's religious liberty and freedom is really, really important. It's always been important in the Baptist tradition. And really, the Baptist Joint Committee has been the one that's been out front in wrestling with and trying to be pushing back against Christian nationalism. So many people assume that Baptists are conservative and that they would automatically lean towards Christian nationalist things, but American Baptists and other more progressive Baptists don't do that. So we're glad to have Reverend Janna Louie here all the way from Los Angeles, and we specifically asked her to help us think about Christians against Christian nationalism, the movement that Baptist Joint Committee started, and what are some of the practical things that we can be doing as we prepare to leave this place. So let's welcome Reverend Janna Louie.
All right. It's good to be with you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Reverend Corey, for having me and having us with you. I'm saying us because I'm collectively representing our collective movement. To locate myself a little bit, I am a daughter of immigrants, which shapes a lot of how I come about and see the world. I am an ordained American Baptist minister, and I serve as the chief of staff with the Baptist Joint Committee. The Baptist Joint Committee, to give a little bit more context, we've been doing about legal advocacy for about the last 90 years, really advocating for religious liberty and the separation of church and state. One of my favorite things about our work right now is that we're really moving to activate and make sure people know their agency and engage locally. So when people say, oh, it must be a really tough job, it is hard, but I would say I actually am deeply encouraged by people like you who are taking a whole Saturday, even your Friday night, to gather and to engage because you love your communities and you're really loving the world around you. And so we're going to be talking a bit about community organizing today. And I do think one of the things I love about community organizing is that everyone has a part to play. I love the questions about the next generations. Everybody has a part to play, no matter who you are. There's different ways that people step forward and backward in different times and moments, and that's a really powerful thing. The last thing I'll say to locate myself is I come with an education background, which means I'm going to need a little bit more engagement from you all today. So I hope that's okay with you. So a nod to the next generation. If you do have your phones, I will ask you to pull out your phones and go to the website menti.com, MENT.com. You'll be able to follow along with the slideshow here, but I will be asking for your participation. As you submit things there, when you get to the Menti, it's a little small, so I will read it for you. They'll ask you to submit a code. The code is 7311-5244. I'll repeat that one more time. So it's menti.com, 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 and the code is 7311-5244. Join, all right. If you can get in, say join. Yeah, that's right. All right. I'm looking for a couple more hands so I can see that others made it. All right. Okay. All right. Well, the question I want to start with, we've talked a lot, we've heard a lot, we have digested many different things, but the question I want to ask us is, if we can move it, is what do we mean by white Christian nationalism? I know early on, Dr. Palermo said, you'll talk about it, you'll define it. There's a lot of different things floating out there, but if we don't know what we mean by white Christian nationalism, it's a little bit hard to organize against or even figure out what to do, right? So I'm going to break it down in a couple different ways, and this is where I'm going to ask you to respond on your phones and the Menti. So my first question to break it down for us is, what is white? If that seems, I'm hearing some chuckles, but I really mean it. And when you put your responses, it'll show up on the screen so we can see them. What is white? How would you define what is white? And what do you think of when you hear white? European? I'm going to read them out loud in case you can't see, but you should be able to see. The code, yes, 7311-5244. Yep. I love it. I'm loving the engagement. Thank you. All right, not Black or Hispanic, Caucasian, social construct of race and class, Caucasian, Euro-American, superior, European ancestry. In the US, people who perceive race privileges, us, I think. Yeah. Caucasian, ethnic default in the USA culture, carrying social privilege, white American men. I'm gonna scroll. White, in quotes, is the lie of perfection constructed to support colonizing the imperfect. I see you all have been paying attention today. A privileged skin color, power holders. Some non-Caucasians are also white. Ooh, somebody's getting into some territories. A color, snow-colored, European. Giving time in case others have, for the internal processors who need a little bit more time. Okay. Better to say Caucasian because it is not only about skin color. Early migrants from Africa. Okay. Thanks. Y'all are doing great. There's no right or wrong here. I really just want to get a sense of what's in the room here. All right, the second piece. What is Christian? And specifically, who do you think is the Christian in white Christian nationalism? Evangelicals? Social construct. Seeing some themes there. Christian, follow Jesus, but like in the trad wife way. Y'all are really reaching that, going from that next generation speak. I see you. Not Jesus of Nazareth. Conservative evangelical Christians. I think it's not real Christian, but a false idea of faith based on empire building. Yeah. Yes, feel free to say the amens if you need for those who are. White misogynist men. Those who claim allegiance to Jesus, which Jesus? Followers of Christ? Christ-like, meaning caring about others. On some level, conservative, a Christian can act in Christ-like ways. The gullible and fear-stricken Midwesterners. Hey, I'm from the Midwest, y'all. I'm playing. A follower of Jesus Christ or someone purporting to follow Christ and his teachings. Christian. Oh, you can't see it? Oh, it's hard to hear. Okay, is that better? Okay, I'll try to do that better. Christian is a follower of Jesus. Christian nationalists are not Christian. Thank you. All right, and one more question. What is nationalism? And how do you recognize nationalism? Love of country. Chauvinism. Borders, I'm going to take that as borders over people. I was a former math teacher, so are borders greater than people? There's a lot of ways you can take that. Love of country above individuals. This is what the right is monopolizing on patriotism as defined by white manifest destiny. Believes one country's is best. Conflating patriotism with worship. Putting your own country first before the betterment of the world. Sorry, you should be able to see it too on your phones, but I'm trying to read. And elevating country citizenship over heavenly citizenship. Flags, political movement, yeah. Okay. Drawing lines around some people instead of all. Oh, there we go, there's more. Allegiance to one country's in the extreme, it is also believing that national identity is defined in only one way, excluding non-natives. Yeah. All right. See, Americans' exceptionalism, native exceptionalism, patriotism. Great. Thanks. Well, just to give a couple of different pieces for us to think about, a couple ways to think about it is, and I think when we started, we used some different legal cases and definitions. I'll just say, I think whiteness, overall, I would say, I define it as power and privilege, and especially as defined by law. So 1922 case, Ozawa versus US, was when a Japanese person was not eligible for naturalization because he wasn't white, right? So that legal definition, and I'm using that because it speaks to a structure within our country and the way that we think about the world or order it. Nancy Leong writes about racial capitalism, about whiteness as power and privilege. Primarily, right, as you think about these definitions. And so another way to think about it is citizenship, right, as in these court cases, as defined by whiteness. I'm gonna go pretty quickly through this so we can get to what we'll do. There's also the idea of Christian normativity, that this is the Christian piece, and how Christian faith is actually tied to whiteness and citizenship in law, right? So American racial history, Khaled Beydoun writes this, American racial history is comprised of a litany of passages whereby whiteness was denied to a host of groups on account of religion and outwards expression of religious identity. So in there you have court cases like from 1923, US versus Thind, where Thind is not eligible for citizenship, even though he was categorized as racially white. And so it actually led to the denaturalization of a lot of Asian Indian Americans, right? So we also see this through the war on terror, the impacts of 9/11, and the like. And then in terms of nationalism, just a quick thought. And some of you all kind of noted this, but I would say if we're thinking about it in the legal ways, as we think about it, I would say nationalism is the exertion of power through borders. And then you see that put it out in cases for citizenship and the ways that we think about it. So I remember the borders over greater than nation. I saw you, I see you all. So I think the summary I would say is that white Christian nationalism has everything to do with the exertion of power. And so power, whether it's through whiteness or what defines or how whiteness is defined, which it has changed in different court cases through the years, through religion or through border enforcement. And so white Christian nationalism is really about the convergence of power in these kind of overlapping or intermingled realities as defined by the government, right? So, and I'm saying that because it's a structural piece, right? Because sometimes we can say, oh, it's how we feel about something or how somebody feels about something. But I think at the end of the day, when we're thinking about action, we have to understand the way it's connected to systems. And so another way to see it is the fusion of white power and Christian supremacy through the state is another way I would define it. And I think we've talked about this a bit today, but I think we do have to, if we're thinking about action and what will and can change, we have to think about what the appeal is. And I think part of the appeal is that white Christian nationalism addresses fear and it offers belonging. There is something that it offers a set of people, whether or not that actually is the case. It is what it offers, and I think it is what it makes it appealing to some folks. And white Christian nationalism, I think, challenges those of us who identify as Christians to consider how we will relate well to the state and government. And we've mentioned, in particular, through today, religious liberty and the separation of church and state. And I do think in the ways that those who are people of faith engage with action, we do have to think about what it means to be disciplined in that, so that we're not kind of doing the same or using the same methods as we engage. I think that is important. So I would say, what do we do about it? We organize. We organize. And this is not a new thing. This has been around, but it does take discipline. It does take showing up. It does take collective work. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Even just now, we've been talking about the religious right, and the reality is we are over 60 years behind. We are very, very much behind. The infrastructures are not fully set up, but I'm not going to be here and say that there aren't infrastructures. I do think there are infrastructures that we can be a part of. But I think it's also why we have to understand strategy. We have to be able to think about collective movement. And it means that sometimes we don't disagree, or we don't agree on everything, but we can still move together in action. And I think there's a lot of hope in that. The reality is that systemic issues can be very overwhelming. So even as you put in your responses to what is white, what is Christian, what is nationalism, it can be really overwhelming. I get that. And so I think we can sometimes respond in rage. We can feel hopeless. And I think we can sometimes even want to look for a way to escape. I do think, I'm sure you have heard the ways that people have talked about the administration's tactic of overwhelming people, and it's working in a lot of ways. But I think organizing, what community organizing does is it places the power into the hands of the people to demand change. And I think that's where we come in. That's why you all being here is evidence of that. So we do have a lot of work to do, but we do need to organize and we need to act. And I will just say it's not enough to understand. I think our team has been in a lot of places around the country, and there's a lot of people who want to do workshops and webinars, and they want to understand more. And I love education. I will geek out with you any day on law reviews or academic articles, but just reading these articles and thinking about it and doing our, intellectual exercises will not bring about change. I don't want to get kicked out here. No. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the amen. But yes, we cannot, in our intellectual exercises, that will not change anything. I do believe knowledge is power. I'm a former educator. I'm like putting out there. And I will say it also really broke my heart when I came to terms with that, I think during the first Trump administration, because I was hoping that education and thinking about issues would be the saving grace. It was not and is not. And so we have to organize. And so I'd like to delineate also between organizing and advocacy. And I think Catherine kind of sort of was touching nicely about it with the marches, but I'm gonna say advocacy meaning one-time events, right? Or sometimes people have talked about the younger generation being like sort of armchair activists where you just wanna share a social media post. I'm just gonna say that's not organizing. That is not what I mean by organizing. And I'm also differentiating it from mobilizing, which means just showing up, right? And we do need to mobilize. We do need people to show up, but organizing requires leadership, and it requires commitment and action. And so this is why I would say community organizing requires strategy. It requires kind of localizing demands on the local level in order to engage in the bigger issues. So that's what I want to focus on today with you all. A brief chart that I find very helpful with some of the pieces I just mentioned. In organizing, power is defined as organized people and organized resources. It was a great setup with Catherine to talk about power or people and finances are organized. But that means that it requires a collective movement. And in the US, we love being individualistic. And even our European friends have said, you all have a different kind of individualistic. It's like a self-centered individualism where we kind of just like to be in our own sandbox, or it's kind of self-serving. I say that lovingly to say we will not get anywhere if we're so tied to our individualistic kind of self-centered ways. It has to be a collective movement. And second, while we want to see tangible change, another part of organizing is the transformation. And I think this is a really beautiful thing, that the community itself also is transformed in the process of organizing and being organized. I've experienced this, and sometimes you think about community organizing and moving with a campaign that's long-term, strategic, moving towards a particular goal. Sometimes you don't get that campaign win that you want. But even then, sometimes when you don't, if organizing does what it's meant to do, it transforms the whole community in the process. You begin to realize how you're a part of the collective, and we're moved in the process. I think that's a really incredible thing. And this chart, I think, helps us to focus on the different types of actions that our efforts can involve. So just to go in the different pieces there, advocacy, a couple examples I would think about are signing a petition, going to a rally, sharing something on social media, kind of a one-time, one-off event sort of thing, where you have an issue, you're talking about something. And as you can see, it doesn't necessarily lead to individual transformation, right? It might be a part of a larger whole, so you see the collective piece. But there's that piece. Legal service, serving a particular situation in a particular context. I am not a legal lawyer, but that does give kind of a direct service that's speaking to a particular place. It doesn't require anything collective necessarily, and it doesn't necessarily lead to kind of individual transformation because you're responding to something in a situation at a particular place. And then there's the nonprofit service, social change, and this is where I put in the piece that I mentioned earlier about learning, awareness, understanding, thinking about pieces, but social service without social change. And this is sort of community development pieces as well that I know a lot of faith communities are often really involved in, but it doesn't necessarily push towards collective action, I would say, because you're still kind of responding to something, right? One example that people talk about is if you notice a community doesn't have food to eat, right? You can say, oh, here's fish in the pond, right? And you can kind of fish the fish, you bring it to the community, right? Next level would be, oh, you can teach people how to fish, right? So you teach people how to fish. They can go fish for themselves. Well, organizing, this last piece that we'll focus on today, is actually saying, oh, you can teach people to fish, but there's a whole fence around the wall, a pond. So how do you teach the community to say, hey, why is there a fence around the pond? And how do you take down the fence? And then you can also go fish, right? So that's where I would say community development or social services they work together with organizing, but organizing is going to be about taking down, getting resources to take down that fence so that there's access. Okay. All right. So there's a couple of just another way to see the different mediums of change. And I think through organizing, what you can do is you change the script to transform power structures to be in the hands of the people, which is what it was meant to be, I think, in the way that this country was set up, we hope, some ways. Organizing gives voice to the people because often the question for organizers is, what is the greatest pain of your community? Right, so if you can talk to the pain, and then I would add from a faith-based perspective, it would be, what is the healing piece that we're going to be a part of? for this community. And so it has to be led by those who are most impacted, and organizing being led by the community that's most impacted, because we fundamentally believe that the community that's most impacted knows what's best and what's needed for the issues that they face, right? This is kind of a visceral understanding of what is needed. So the question then is, how do we do this with white Christian nationalism? Well, policies are spread. Brad Onishi writes about this in some of his research, but he talks a lot about how Christian nationalism is mostly happening in policy levels on the local level. It's most active there, it's spreading there, school boards, local city councils, which means good news is you can really do something. Local reality, it is bigger than kind of looking at big news headlines. We look at SCOTUS opinions and you're like, oh my goodness, what's, but actually if you activate on the local level, it's doable, and it's maybe, arguably, I think the most effective. I draw upon Justo Gonzalez, who says being against something is not being for something. And, as Reverend Corey introduced, BJC works with a campaign or an initiative called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. I recognize the issue with that, because it already backs us into a lot of different places that actually doesn't help, because the question, actually, I would even ask is, what are we for? If we don't know what we're for, it actually isn't anything compelling that we're organizing towards, right? To just say, we just don't like this. And so I would say that the most important piece then for us with thinking about white Christian nationalism is needing to cut the issue. Cut the issue so that we can see how it plays itself out on local levels, and it does look different in different contexts. Cutting the issue allows you to engage in more impactful and effective ways. As I mentioned, because you can do something, the community can see it in front of them. It's practical, and you can mobilize people. This is just one way of seeing what it means to cut the issue, and we will be practicing this, so you'll hear me talking about this just a little bit. I won't be just talking at you the whole time. But cutting the issue, we'll see that our broad problem at the top is Christian nationalism. That's why we're gathered here today. But then from there, we want to cut the issue and say, what are the specific symptoms and causes for the problem? And I'll give you some examples in just a bit. And then to be effective, and this is where you can really hit the local level, you look at each symptom and cause, and then you think about what are the local issues or policies where we can actually organize people for change. Okay, and you might say, well, it's not all Christian nationalism, but when you start picking off these different pieces, the pillars of support that are holding up these different issues, that's how we'll be able to affect change. So an example from one of our first coalitions that we started with BJC was actually in North Texas. And it's just to give you some hope, because I know those of us from blue states and cities are like, oh, Texas. But I've also lived in Tennessee before, and I've realized it is so easy for me to vote in California. I'm sent a notification of my ballot in the email. When I haven't voted yet, they will send me a reminder. When I was in Tennessee, I had to find a specific location, and when I got to the ballot box, this is after I had graduated from college, I did not understand the words on the ballot. And that speaks to I could have done my homework, but it was very hard to figure out how to vote. And so there are different realities, but in North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area, that was the largest number of people who wanted to activate for us when we started this initiative 6 years ago. And so that's where we started our community organizing, a very different place. But these are the issues that the coalition there kind of looked at from Christian nationalism to parse out what they focused on. And you'll see circled behind me is public education and immigration were the two key pieces that they've decided to focus on as a coalition. But they had to cut the issue first in order to figure out how to be most effective. From there, I believe you might have heard about different voucher schemes. That has been one part of it. Or SB 10 in Texas was that they want to post the 10 commandments in all public schools, right? Or SB 11 is demanding prayer in schools. That's all happening right now. And so our coalition there is organizing to resist that and to change the conversation there with that. Now, that's Texas. And I understand we're in Massachusetts. It's lovely to be here near Boston. I am currently from Los Angeles, And so I thought, well, what does it look like in a blue city in context? And so I thought I'd share an example for me being organized as a clergywoman in Los Angeles. What has it looked like? Well, at the very beginning, Dr. Palermo's presentation mentioned economic realities, labor, exploitation. And so one of the clearest connections for me often is about labor. Actually, I think a lot of things can go back to that. Even with white Christian nationalism, if you look back at some of the research on racial capitalism, I think it lays it all out for us. So economic justice, I think, is one way that's important. And Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, or CLU LA, which also founded by Reverend James Lawson, UMC minister, is one way that I think we can engage. And so CLU ran a hospitality campaign that started back in March 2023. And I'll just note a couple contextual pieces before I talk about this campaign to give you a sense of maybe what it could look like. One, Los Angeles, we pride ourselves of being union town. And if you look at John Compton's research as a political scientist, he talks about how national church coalitions were really, though the national church coalitions and labor unions coming together before the 60s were actually why white mainline Protestants were able to make change. Right, after the 60s, the church coalitions kind of dissolved a bit, and then also labor unions kind of less in power in some ways. You can read his book for more research for that. But I'm saying this because I think in blue cities there is more of a sense of there's union infrastructure, and also you have different faith communities and faith-related organizing infrastructure that then we can come together with different campaigns and organizing work. And so what can change look like? I'm going to share about a campaign about a labor contract, or a hotel workers contract, or hospitality workers, which actually will be picking up soon because the Olympics are coming to LA, which means a whole host of issues. But in March 2023, the labor unions had come, the hotel worker unions, we had about 60 hotels that the contract was going to expire in just a couple months. So it was an opportunity then to be able to ask for change, because this was around Los Angeles and Orange County that were set to expire. And so each hotel leader union had a leader that surveyed workers to see if they were willing to be part of the work and to be a part of this campaign. CLU brings in the clergy and faith leaders as a part of that. At this time, they begin public narrative work, and one of the narratives is just that workers had to live or drive into LA for over 2 hours before and after work, after working very long shifts, in order to just get to work, and really laborious work as well. And so the main narrative that we were saying is we want people to be able to live close to where they work. A lot of workers just said they can't even, their kids don't even see their faces because they were driving 2 hours in, they work long days, and then they go back and their kids are already asleep, right? And so that was some of the narrative that had to change. And so to test out how much people would engage with this, they had their first action. This is some pictures for it. In April 2023, it was a night rally in downtown LA, and you can see the cat. They've got kind of, they call it like sort of organizing a political theater, where you can see the cat, the greedy cat with the money. And the question here was how many people would turn out from unions. So wear red, they're kind of bringing together a big movement, and that also signifies to people what is possible. The unions, faith leaders, were all coming out in this place. But this is not yet the start of the campaign with organizing. The start of the campaign is actually June 30th, because the contract was set to expire on July 1st. June 30th, 2023, we have our first nonviolent direct action, where we had about 70 clergy and up 200 people total, with workers included, who were arrested. They sat on, if you've been to LAX, terrible airport, it's pretty bad, but they sat down in Sepulveda Boulevard, which is the main street that goes to LAX. And so they shut down Sepulveda Boulevard to demand a contract negotiation, because basically in March, they had already said no to it, to demand a negotiation at that point. I believe only one hotel actually responded after this civil disobedience. And so that's the kickoff of the campaign. Well, it doesn't stop there because you have 60 hotels, about 59 that still have not signed their contract. And so through the course of the next months, they just kept doing rallies and protests at different hotel sites. You'll see that rat that was sometimes brought to different events, but they had to coordinate so that it wouldn't necessarily be known, right? So sometimes they would bring the rat, and then they would think that they were gonna, the workers were gonna strike, so it kicks off the strike, but then they would remove it and they would strike somewhere else. So for example, Long Beach had the Grand Prix, and so they would often strike the week of the Grand Prix because then it would hit where it hurts the most for the businesses so that they can see the need for change. You'll see the drum there, it's broken because workers did face, as they were striking, a lot of physical abuse. Some lost their jobs. That was broken by a hammer from one of the hotel managers. They came out and just smashed the drum. There's a couple different articles about this, and this goes on and on. And so what I do want to say is, I can say, yay, organizing, but there is a cost to it. Because when it's strategic and it really is asking and demanding for change that we really need, it is costly. And I would say the workers are the ones who pay the most cost as the people who are also most impacted. And as faith leaders, we follow their lead in that. But where do faith leaders come in? These are a couple pictures of when faith leaders came in, and I think of the ways in which Rob was talking about the challenges, the challenge for different ways in which clergy and faith leaders can show up, and I think of these pictures. And I think, I would just say, as someone in a blue city, blue cities are in desperate need of a deeper imagination and a more beautiful imagination. And I think this is some of the ways that faith communities can be a part of it. So faith leaders would come and pray for workers. Often when abuse was happening as they were striking, the cost is great. They would pray for them. We raised money to cover different costs as they were striking. They created space for ritual, a needed space for ritual even there. You can see, I think there's the foot washing and hand washing in front of hotels. And our hotel workers actually felt like it was really hard for them to receive. But that's something that we could offer, which is why we end up washing hands, because we said, we know you're not used to it, but you are the ones who are leading the way. And I think one of the other really beautiful things that they led were faith leaders led truth commissions. So when abuse was happening towards different workers, they called city commissioners, they called elected officials to come. And in the same way as the South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they told stories about the violence and they let workers tell the stories so that the truth was told and we could face the harm that was done. And so there were testimonies about violence, about what was happening. They wrote op-eds, and often clergy and faith leaders were the ones to lead delegations when they went to meet with hotel workers. And so this was a pretty long process, because what I can say about this campaign is we did find victory in September 2024. So for those who can do the math, how many months is that since we started? Yeah, about 15 months. Yeah. So this was over a year of strikes and work. And this was the final celebration where we had faith leaders and workers. And the one thing I'll say is with this, it took a lot of coordinated efforts. It took people stepping up and stepping back, knowing their different roles, but it also was asking for a very specific ask. Right, so we weren't just showing up in front of hotels for no reason. We were demanding a particular contract at a particular time in a particular place. And that's the why, I would say, in terms of why we have to join our efforts and actually have a coordinated organizing campaign strategy and not just kind of, okay, I'll just choose this, I'll choose these pieces so that we can really work together. So I would love for us, yes, we have time, okay, great. I would love for actually you all to be able to do a little bit of this in Boston, and I'll take some of your insights with me as well. So let's cut the issue here a little bit. We've talked about it. You've filled your minds with lots of different pieces about Christian nationalism, but what does it look like here? So if you jump back, this is just one way to see it again as a reminder. The first layer that we need to talk about is what are the symptoms or causes that you see for Christian nationalism? And then later I'll have you think about some local issues. If you jump back on your phone, Cementi, we're not through yet with that. these are just some examples of ways that different people, in case you need to think of something to jog your thoughts, but I'm sure you have, you can think about other different pieces. But if you jump on Menti, I'd like for you all to go ahead and just put some in here. What I'd like to do is after you put some ideas, and hopefully you can submit a couple, I'm gonna break us up into groups based on the symptoms and causes that you all see, and just talk a little bit about the issues that you can address, and place it back into you all to kind of think how you can coordinate your efforts. So I won't read these out, but go ahead and submit. What are some symptoms or causes of Christian nationalism that you see, especially here locally? And if you can, try to think about different, because we're talking about systems, think about the systems, like symptoms and the causes that you see in the political realm as you're thinking about these different pieces. I'm writing down some categories because I'll have you think about policies and local issues that you can actually engage. Feel free to put some more up as you think about it, but I'd love to give you all some time to talk in different maybe pockets that I see. I know I might not capture all of them. Just maybe one response. I see a lot of responses about, and I think this is really insightful, about the loneliness or the powerlessness that people feel. That might be the symptom or the cause, or even the piece there about seeing that softness or something is kind of undesirable. That dynamic that feels, because it's a little bit more on the interpersonal level, I know there's systemic pieces to it, but I'm really focusing on the systems level, things that you can organize to ask for change. However, I do want to note that I can see you all as a faith community thinking about these pieces, and I think community is needed in different ways, and I think there's something about the narrative of how communities care for each other and how people connect that is worth thinking about. So I just want to name, I do think it's worth it, but I think for the purpose of organizing, when we're thinking about systemic change, I'm going to pull out some of the ones that maybe we can have you all think in some groups on, about what issues can be tethered to it that you can maybe join campaigns or work towards. So some of the ones that I see are anti-LGBT or like sentiments and trans terror, right? That is a symptom. I think that's something that you can really think about with what's happening in policies on different levels. Immigration, ICE work, and also targeting sanctuary cities. Minnesota is seeing that. A lot of us are seeing that in really the blue cities. So that's one that you can think about. And that one, I'll just note, you might want to think about at this point, there are conversations that are shifting from the systemic organizing like pieces to mutual aid networks because of where it is and how different it feels. So I'll just name that. I see one on gun violence. I'll just say, coming from California, this one has been tricky to mobilize around because we already have the stricter gun laws. And so if you're thinking about something local, do think about what is possible on the local level if you're thinking about organizing for change. And then I saw some on education, sort of like education. I see it more in the disinformation and facts and making sure schools can teach what they do. So that one I would maybe more broadly say attacks on public education, whether that's, book bans, different things like that. And then the fifth that I see that you can maybe talk through is economic insecurity. I do think that's a pretty big one that you could probably hit on different ways. So can we pull out those 5 groups for our conversation? Okay. All right, the educator in me is gonna make you all move around. So let's say up here, I'm gonna just, right over here, a group, if you're interested in talking about the anti-LGBTQ like sentiments, trans terror, that piece, let's say like the middle, the next column, that area. Let's do immigration, ICE work, yeah. Let's do, in the back over, or like maybe in the second column over here as well. I don't want to move you too far back. On the right here, let's do gun violence. And then right here in the pews right here, let's do the education, like public education, attacks on public education. And then let's do economic insecurity up here, the chairs, okay? I'll give you all about 15 minutes, is okay? And the question I'd like to ask you all is, what are local issues that are connected to these symptoms that you're grouped in, and that you can actually engage and talk about as you gather to work against and fight against Christian nationalism, okay? All right, I will ask you to report back as a teacher would do, so please choose someone, think through some pieces, and try to be as concrete as you can. If you need to do some research on your phones, please do that. What are some local policies, issues that you can really engage with? Yeah. All right, I'm gonna just ask each group maybe to just share a little bit of what specific local issues, and I will push you to identify a local issue that's connected to a system that you could kind of join your efforts with, okay? So that's kind of coming under like in an organizing framework. Those are the things I'll be asking for. So can I start with this group?
A lot of church people don't know anybody who's transgender, and one of the important things to do is to is to educate people as to, as to what all this is about and what it means to be transgender. We were talking about a speaker, a woman who's a pastor whose life is dedicated to going to churches to introduce herself and tell them what her life story is like. And we've been talking about combining. We have smaller churches that feel they can't do much on their own, but combining forces with other nearby churches to get things done would be very helpful.
Thank you. If I may, one thing I might suggest is, in addition to building relationship, from thinking about systemic pieces, is think about what are the groups that are working on trans rights, and what does it look like? Because again, the quote that I have is, being against something is not being for something. So how can you have something you're for, and kind of ask the system to bring about change, in addition to having conversations. So that would just be my offering of encouragement to follow the lead of those who are doing that work. Yeah.
One of the positive examples, I think, of organizing people and money to transform was that a church participating in this conversation supports a local organization that maintains a residence for teens and young adults kicked out of their house for coming out, and provides a place for them to live, enrolls them in the local high school if they're still of that age. And and I thought through that process, that sort of organizing all the way. They're for, they're affirming these young people, and they're organizing resources and people to make that change.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Can we go to the group in the back?
Well, I'm being encouraged to speak. We were talking about immigration, and it seemed to me that looking at the problems of, let's say, our dependence on Haitian and actually other Caribbean, but mainly Haitian, perhaps, immigrants in the healthcare system, nursing homes, and so forth, and that the importance of the labor force and our own just personal needs for the services and the good services of immigrants is that there are, maybe we can think at a kind of small scale level of how do we keep the attention of the local people in media and just neighbors in terms of the value of these workers, our necessity for them, but also the value they bring, and to look at things at kind of the small level in the positives of how they serve and how they make contributions to workforce and community in general.
Yeah, I think I hear, and when I sat in too, I heard a little bit of even the narrative change that's needed. And I will say, I think, I'll say from Los Angeles, because there's not a following of rights or due process at this point. So I think sometimes changing the narrative could be one place, but how do you bring in a larger concerted effort to think about it, and what narrative needs to be changed, I think is a key one for that. So thank you. And I think we had education and then economics.
Yeah. We had a discussion. We didn't, so a couple of thoughts we were just sort of sharing at the end. One is getting elected to local school boards can matter. Yeah. And while on the school board, a couple of things came up. I was saying that supporting the educators, particularly meetings that are on camera. There's open meeting laws in Massachusetts, and supporting the educators on camera to emphasize the points that they're making when extremists come and try to dive bomb some of the content of the meeting. Secondly, encouraging a school district to have a strategic plan so that when the extremists come in and try to take out whole parts of the curriculum, you can say, well, we have a strategic plan and that doesn't really fit with the strategic objective. And thirdly, to try to tag team. Sometimes serving these terms is really hard time, particularly you have children in the school district. Your kids can be targeted, your family can be targeted. And so, serving a term and then having someone else pick it up so that one family's not, taking on so much stress of the targeting that can happen in communities. So those were a couple of things we talked about.
Yeah, I especially love you're placing people into the school boards, that's one. But then the second piece that you noted of putting protections in place, I think that's a really incredible and beautiful way of kind of strengthening the imagination of what public schools can be at a time where we're seeing it kind of fall apart. And so I love that because you're giving a campaign for what it could be for. And I imagine working with teachers' unions really important. I think as a former educator, I think of that, and also how do you, that's definitely kind of a really huge place you can bring in momentum and think about long-term change, right? So you're not just responding to something. I love that, thank you.
Hi, we are talking about economic insecurity, and we started talking about how, in many ways, Massachusetts is in pretty good shape compared to other places. But that's certainly not the case with low-income workers. And your example about the hotel workers, I'm sure that could be a place to focus. And I love your example about that, like for here locally, the SEIU, working with local clergy, and with support from lay people and so on. That would certainly be one approach. But then we came to something else that's really important, and that's child care workers, because it's a twofer. They are way underpaid and underappreciated, and they're absolutely necessary to enable these young families that we're talking about not being able to support themselves in a place where the cost of living is very high. So it supports other workers and supports them, but we don't kind of know where to start with child care workers because we don't know about a union. We don't know, it seems like they're sort of on their own, which makes it even more important and more help needed. We kind of don't know where to start. Anybody want to add anything to that?
That's pretty good. I will say one thing I think locally here, I think we're building, Massachusetts is doing a good job of building low and mixed income housing along the public transportation corridors. Right here is the 300 units about to come. I think that's really going to be helpful to take some pressure off. But Massachusetts is different, and it's different. It's rural is different than urban, and particularly here. So we were discussing those aspects as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate the attention to thinking about most impacted communities and maybe the ones that are disconnected. That I think when you have structures like unions, it's helpful to kind of bring together a collective effort. So that means the infrastructure is already there. But when there are places like childcare workers, as you are noting, where there's less of a connection, then some of the organizing effort actually starts from even comments that you all made of listening to the community, seeing what their needs are. Because even with the beginning of that campaign, right, and that public narrative work, before it even started, was asking hotel workers about their situation. So that idea of we don't even see our children became that cry because they heard from people what the needs are. And so I love that because I think economic realities, I would say, from my view, immigration and economics, both parties right now don't have a compelling narrative. But one of the ways we can really kind of bring our efforts, I think, especially in community organizing way, is to think about what are the pain points, what are the needs, and how do we come together to be for a just society. Thanks. Should we have like a couple minutes for questions, if maybe one or two questions, if anything. But,
yeah, so we can take a few minutes for question and answer.
I'm encouraged to hear you all name these pieces, though.
Yeah.
I would just like to make a comment about child care workers. I just heard a couple of days ago that 3 counties in Colorado are about to vote to raise taxes so that they could raise money for child care to be paid for or subsidized by the government.
Mm-hmm.
So any other questions? Okay, let's thank Reverend Janna for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, well, thanks so much. So here we are at the very end of the end. So I just want to thank everybody for coming out. Thanks to the folks, obviously, at Second Church who've been hosting. Thanks to Sandwich Works for all of the meals. Our three great sponsors, the Southern New England Conference of the UCC and their Center for Transformational Leadership, the folks at Unite Boston, and then Advocates for Love and Religious Freedom. I hope you're able to connect up with them. Right here is a QR code for Christians Against Christian Nationalism, which is part of the Baptist Joint Committee. If you don't have a QR code function on your phone, you can sign up on there. This will go directly to them. They're good at handling the emails and the lists and everything like that. And Advocates for Love and Religious Freedom, I think their stuff is gone, but you can connect with me. That's the 3 different local UCC churches in Massachusetts and Illinois. Again, I hope that you take something with you in the form of a pledge of something that you would like to do as you depart, whatever it might happen to be, something that inspired you, something that really moved you or scared you. But what makes this kind of work so important is that we actually do something for it, from it, and for it, so that it's not just performative. Stay up with Christians Against Christian Nationalism, all of our other groups as well. Reverend Janna will be preaching at our service tomorrow, 10 a.m. here, so everybody's welcome. Feel free to bring a friend if you like. If you can clean up as you are preparing to depart, that is great. And I'm always around, and if you ever want me to come speak to your church or help you organize anything like that, my information is on the back of the program. You can pick them up if you didn't happen to get one, and obviously on the website. Yeah, Bubba, did you want to add something? What's that? Sure, of course. Come on up. Bubba wants to send us off. Yes. Yeah.
Glorious God, bless this community of people of faith. Send them forth with courage and hope and spread the good word. In Jesus' name we say, Amen.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Do stay in touch.